Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget, millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to RightOnGame.com.
That's RightOnGame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. RightOnGame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGBT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could come along for the ride. We've got a fascinating lineup for you on the show. And we're going to top it off with Shelly Klingerman. Shelly and I came to know each other several years ago. Shelly is, becoming her own expert at personal safety and situational awareness. Somebody who has stayed the course. She produced a documentary DVD several years ago on the Beslan attack, school attack in Russia. But congratulations to Shelly, because she has just written a book. And her book is available on Amazon.com. Run over there and get it. The title is Vigilance. And you'll know when you see the book because it's got a black stiletto on the cover. And with that, welcome back, Shelly.
Thank you for having me.
Very happy that you could be with us. Now, you have kind of made it your mission here on personal safety and situational awareness. What really drove you to that?
You know, I think it's something that women in particular just don't talk about enough. And it's at the foundation of our hierarchy of needs, yet it's something that we kind of take for granted and we don't want to talk about it because sometimes it's really not a comfortable situation or it's not a comfortable topic. But it's something that in today's world is so necessary to discuss, as well as model behavior for our kids who are getting ready to go out into this world.
The world is ugly, and that cannot be denied for sure. And as the years go by, we have all this technology at our hands and our disposal, and we put them to good use, such that we almost rely on them to kind of cover for our inadequacies. And so our heads are down in our tablets and our iPhones, and we're not paying attention around us, right?
That's absolutely right. And
so,
our kids, I think, are even more so doing that.
Yeah. And we have this big, huge reliance on government. Like government's going to be there, police or, somebody else is going to be kind of watching over our shoulder. And that's just not the case. And what you want to do is really impart to women out there, hey, just take a half an hour and learn something. Is that right, Shelly?
Yeah, the book is really just full of really quick tips, tricks, and tactics. And really, they're things you probably already know and you've heard at some point. Some of them I hope are new. But it's just one of those topics that needs to be top of mind. And you need to go back and you need to remind yourself as you're walking, you're like, oh, look up, look around. These are things that we just need to make a habit. And there are really simple things in the book, too, that you can adjust, just everyday activities that just make you a little less of a target. It makes you a little hardened target compared to the person who's next to you not doing these things. So it's really nothing that requires any kind of special training. You don't have to arm up if that is not, something you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. These are really just behaviors that alone, once we bring ourselves back to them, make us more tuned in, more aware of our surroundings, therefore making us a little bit less attractive to a predator, if you will.
Did these tactics or these tips come to you from personal experience or in your travels and interviewing, other people that are, have that expertise?
Like you said, this is something I've been interested in for a long time. So I have always kind of taken initiative on this front. I took Jeet Kune Do as a young 20-some-year-old, and I've always had interest. And so I will strike up conversations, especially you referenced I did the documentary. Through that process, when I would interview these subject matter experts, law enforcement, ex-military, first responders, I would ask them the questions that were relevant to the documentary topic, which was, again, school safety. But then when the cameras would go off, I was always really interested in their trade craft and just kind of things that they did as an individual and in their profession to stay safe. So I would run scenarios and say, oh, if you were in this scenario, what would you do? And then they started turning it around on me. And as someone at the time who was a female business traveler, traveling largely on my own and had been for many years, they would set up a scenario for me and say, well, what would you do? And there were more than a few times where I was stumped, like I either didn't know what to do, or when I answered, I did kind of the wrong thing. And they'd be like, you really should have done this. So it was through that process and through collecting some of those just bits and pieces that when I would start to have the conversation with my friends, families, and colleagues, and would ask, okay, what would you do in this situation? I would just, in conversation, share with them what I learned, and they didn't know either. So it just started being a trend that, especially when I was talking to women, it just wasn't even something they thought about in general. It wasn't even sometimes that they were ignoring it or denying it. They just didn't even think about it. And the worst time to think of something is in the moment of a crisis. That's not the first time you want to put some thought to, oh, what should I do? So that's really where the catalyst for the book came. And now I'm getting ready to send my daughter to college next year, and she wants to study international and global studies and will be required to study abroad. And I'm thinking, I really want her to be armed with this information so that when I send her, I don't think as a parent you're ever 100% comfortable, but knowing that she has this foundation and that she has these tools and techniques and awareness, I feel like she will be a smidgen more savvy than had we not had the conversation.
In this quest to write this book, do you see the world a little bit differently having learned all these tactics?
I do, and I also feel empowered by it. So I think that is really what I want to make sure comes across in the book. This book is not to rattle off things to scare you. It is very much the opposite. I'm sharing these things to empower. And so that in a number of situations where you might feel like you're helpless and you have no options, it is very much the opposite. You have been exposed to these. You've thought about them, you've visualized yourself in them, and you do have options, so you can act, and you don't have to stand there and be a helpless person, victim, whatever this situation is.
So, it's like if you watch the 6 o'clock news and you see certain things, you just kind of wonder how many people in your family, that if you're watching the news together, you have a conversation about, like, what would you do in that situation? So you're attempting to answer some of those issues. And the conditions situational awareness, the events go from the sublime to the ridiculous. Are you just trying to have the reader see the world a little bit differently or a little more clearer?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm trying to introduce a number of solutions and topics and situations, but then let the reader kind of dive into, oh, I really want to learn more about this. And I think that's what I have experienced, in the process of writing. The more you know, the more you want to know. So that alone makes us a more educated population. And that alone can help, instill safety around us. You fortify yourself, your community, your nation. So, it's getting everybody engaged to be part of the solution and make us personally, community, and nationally a more hardened target.
When you talk to some of these officials, if you will, those that are former military or active military or law enforcement or national security professionals, as you approached doing the book, Shelly, did you find that, you had some things in mind, but what you learned from them was just, its own volume, such that, you couldn't write the book fast enough?
Yeah, definitely. And, the book did take me 2 years, and that's for the reasons of wanting to make sure I did talk to a number of different people, and I do cover a number of different situations, and each chapter kind of covers something differently. So, yeah, it was a process. And yes, every, time there was a news headline, my publisher would say, you need to get this book out because what you're writing is really relevant to what's going on in the headlines. However, I didn't want to rush it. And as I talked to these individuals, they were all so incredibly helpful because they spend their day in and day out trying to beat the drum and raise awareness for a number of these, situations. So when somebody is coming and asking, let me help, they were very, very cooperative.
In these discussions, Shelly, have you found that other people are often willing to help out in a situation, or they kind of, in some kind of threatening situation where injury or life or robbery or some other kind of crime or conflict may happen? Do you find that people want to just necessarily kind of walk away from it, or they would, help out and want to diffuse the situation and give you some assistance? So in other words, you're not the lone, you're not a victim all by yourself. Someone's coming to your aid.
Yeah, I think a lot of people walk away and don't engage because they really don't know what to do. And again, in the moment is not the time to, run through your mental Rolodex to figure out, okay, what should I do? So hopefully, a goal of this would be that you have exposed and you have encouraged people to take a little bit of initiative and explore and think about and again visualize themselves. So maybe one of the scenarios you visualize yourself in is walking upon someone who is being attacked or trying to be pulled into a car. You're more likely to act if you have something to go to. And I think that's just goes back to the point of writing it, because we don't talk about it. You really don't know what to do and you just stand there a little bit paralyzed. The goal of this is to have all of this familiar and comfortable to you so that you do act.
How do you practice?
You visualize. First of all, you have to see yourself in that situation. Second, you compete. So we all know when we get in a situation where our fight or flight kicks in, you have that adrenaline rush and you get a little bit of that tunnel vision and your fine motor skills can disappear. There's really no other way to replicate that other than really competing. And it doesn't have to be competing in hand-to-hand combat. It can be competing in any sport or activity where you get a little bit of that natural adrenaline, and then take a couple minutes to maybe see yourself in something, or maybe you literally, and as silly as it might look, maybe you try to throw a palm up into, what you think is somebody's nose, but you're acting in that moment when that adrenaline is present so that you get familiar as to how to work through that. And I'm sharing this through training this when I've talked to, some of the special force guys. They train this and they train with, live ammo sometimes, or they train in situations and they will literally run through their drill so that they get the feeling of what it's like to, pull a trigger of a gun or throw a punch or do some kind of motor when that adrenaline is present, because it's different. And you make a good point. Like, you kind of have to practice this I was talking to someone who was giving me a story that he actually had like a really near miss accident on his motorcycle, and he kind of laid it down in a ditch. And he's like, I know people were looking at me. He said, but I jumped up and I started shadow boxing because I had that true adrenaline rush that he took the opportunity to shadow box on the side of the road. I don't think that's necessarily what we're all going to do, but it just plays to the fact that your body is going to do different things. And really the only way to know what that is to get yourself in a situation where your adrenaline kicks in, and then you can kind of just get used to that feeling.
What is there a age group or an age limitation that you want to begin to teach this to? I mean, should you start planting the seeds to a 6-year-old, or you need to wait till they're in their early teens, or what?
I think, again, I'm speaking from personal experience. My kids have kind of grown up around this. So I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And I use headlines to talk about a learning opportunity, an educational opportunity. So, headline, child tries to get abducted from local park. Rather than turning that off when it's on and so my kids aren't afraid, I will use that and say, hey, if you were at the park and you're playing and someone tries to drag you into a car, what would you do? When you talk about it in a non-threatening situation like that, they can think about it. And then you just keep asking that question. I do this with my kids when we go into a movie theater. And it's really casual. You say, hey, where's the nearest exits? And they will point out, because they've been conditioned to know to look for them now. If someone came in here and they were acting crazy and maybe showed a gun, what would you do? And they can calmly say, I get down, I get on my hands and knees, get out of sight. So I think you definitely can start introducing it at an age-appropriate level. Like, I don't know that I would go full out, active shooter with a 6-year-old, but if someone tries to get you into a car, those are all things that get them just aware, and then you start adding on, age-appropriate scenarios. But, doing it regularly takes the fear factor out of it, and it becomes, again, empowering. So if, I found out that my kids are on lockdown at a school, which has actually happened, I feel comfortable, and I was, texting her like every other parent does when your child's in the school. But, my guidance to her is like, what to do. Like, I'm trying to, keep my cool to make sure that she's not freaking out. But I'm like, what to do. Just stay calm, pay attention, listen to what's going around, just do what you know to do. And she was able to get through it. I mean, it wasn't less scary, but she wasn't losing her composure. And again, getting to the point where you can't act because you're so out of sorts. So this book is really intended to, again, let people know, okay, I have options. I need to stay calm and think myself out of this situation because I have all of these things in my repertoire that I can go to.
I was playing a tennis match yesterday, and one of the gals who was my opponent between games, she said, my husband travels because he's in the Navy, and she's home alone, no kids, and they wanted to have some kind of construction done on their house. So she had reached out to this fellow, or anyway, he was involved in some kind of a contract or off making a quote. Well, she ended up with his business card. She Googled his name and found out that he's on the sexual predator registry in her area. So I was really kind of gratified knowing that I was going to have you on the show. I was really kind of gratified that she took an early offensive measure,
right?
Especially that, she's in that house by herself. And if he had gotten the job to do this construction, she would have been there alone and no telling what could have happened. So there are some that do think and take some offensive measures. And that's really, I think, part and parcel of what your book is illustrating too, correct?
Absolutely. Be proactive rather than reactive.
And there's a lot of things you can do, and it's not just when you're outside of your house. It's also when you're inside of your house. You want to be very aware of your neighborhood. You want to be very aware of what's going on in your street, in the local shopping center, as you said, the movie theater. So it's not about just getting on an airplane and traveling, internationally. I mean, all of those things play into your personal security, hotels, taxis, Ubers, all those kinds of things. So, is there a particular tip that resonated with you in the book most of all of the tips or the tactics?
Yeah, I think look up, look around. I mean, it's not something that we had to really remind people, 10 years ago. But just by looking up and looking around, you notice things. And you will quickly notice them if you are scanning on a regular basis. So, you talk about your neighborhood. We all know that we have distracted driving, and we will even so much as be driving and checking phones and texting and such. Just being able to pick up a car that's maybe sitting there as you pull into your neighborhood or on a street that's not normally there is enough to bump somebody. So if someone's doing some quote unquote surveillance to look for somebody who is getting out of their car and walking in, looking at their phone, not paying attention, and they're going to go up and snag their purse, simply by looking up and looking around to send a message to whoever is surveying, like, okay, this person isn't going to be a good target because she will see me coming or she notices me. You wait 5 minutes and you will probably be able to find someone these days that is getting out of their car, looking at their phone, walking in, not paying attention, which then they become the easier subject matter, if you will. So if there's one thing that is at the core of this book that resonates across ages is look up and look around. It's kind of like the new see something, say something. Look up, look around.
And that's so simple, isn't it?
It is. But how many times do we catch ourselves not doing it?
Yes.
And I'm guilty as well. I'm
I
working
think
on it.
we all are, because there are so many distractions, especially with communications right in your hands, the palm of your hand. So, you're responding to a text message, you're responding to a post, whatever it may be. And, in that very second, it takes a moment for somebody to snatch your purse or to grab you and throw you into a car or, hijack your car. So, I would almost think
but then you add in, we also now plug our ears with earbuds. How many people do you see walking around with earbuds? So now, not only are we not using our eyes, we're not even able to hear somebody coming up on us.
I'm so delighted that you've taken a stand. I mean, I think you've done a public service to people that you may not even realize yet. I expect you have to be giving a lot of talks at the school, public school level. They ought to be bringing you in and having a seminar or a class on this. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is called Vigilance, and you can trot on over to Amazon.com and it's a must buy, regardless of what your age is. And I would also say it doesn't have to be just for women, although it's geared to women. But congratulations, Shelly. Thanks so much for being with us. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Separation of powers. I think the lines has become so blurred. Well, we had to call in Jonathan Wood at the Pacific Legal Foundation because they seem to be the law firm that's more aggressive and assertive on this particular matter, and we're very happy for that. So thank you, Jonathan, for joining us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you for having me.
Did I get that right? I mean, have we kind of blurred the lines of separation of powers of government?
I think absolutely. Our founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, created three separate and competing parts of the government. We have Congress, the legislative branch, the president, the executive branch, and the courts. And the vision was for each of them to exercise different powers and to basically police each other. And unfortunately, starting about 150 years ago, that system eroded as the government developed administrative agencies that combined all three powers into one, so that today, too often, Americans are subject to laws that weren't written by Congress but were written by a bureaucrat in an executive agency. The same bureaucrat or someone else within the agency gets to decide how to enforce and interpret those laws. And often, the agency even gets to pick the judge that hears the cases it brings against Americans. And that is fundamentally inconsistent with the Constitution our founding fathers wrote.
Okay, so I was okay until you said 150 years ago. Has it been really 150 years that we little people out here haven't, paid attention or challenged government for, bureaucratic stuff that's kind of made all of government one entity?
Well, I think about it in terms of the history of an idea. So about 150 years ago, the progressive movement started to build momentum for the idea that democratic accountability was actually a bad thing, not a good thing. And we instead of being ruled by the people we elect, we should be ruled by experts. So there was a push to say, well, scientists should decide what regulations and what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And it took a very long time to get to where we are, from the kernel of that idea to their modern administrative state. There were, at points, big jumps. So during the New Deal era, there was a huge growth in administrative agencies and the powers they exercised, another huge jump in the 60s and 70s. And I think one of the things that's often missed is that the tide has since turned. In the last few decades, there's been a growing scholarly criticism of the administrative state and efforts by Congress, the executive branch, and courts to start to rein back some of the power they've been given. So it took a long time for us to get here, and we definitely have a problem today. But I think there's a positive story to tell, that the tide really has turned, and the people we elect are starting to take a little bit more responsibility for what we elected them to do.
So case in point, you mentioned the New Deal, but would another one necessarily be Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act? Because I think, what was it, started off at 12 or 1,500 pages and ended up well over 20,000. So as a consequence, in order to carry out the law, one or more government agencies had to put in all of these little things that ended up really expanding the law. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And, it was telling while the law was being debated that Nancy Pelosi said, well, look, we have to enact it to find what's in it. And she was mocked at the time, but that is the reality of the administrative state. When Congress isn't actually writing the rules, but instead letting unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats do it, Congress can't know what the laws are until the bureaucrats tell them what the laws are. And, that is unfortunate. That is definitely not the system our founding fathers envisioned, and it is antithetical to democratic accountability. You or I could get in contact with our congressmen or senators. We could vote them out of office if they do things we don't like. There's absolutely nothing we can do to find, contact, or hold accountable the bureaucrats who reign power at EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, or any other alphabet soup agencies in the Beltway.
So the consequences of this are really very widespread, because there's really not a government agency that is really not guilty of this kind of practice. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right. The problem is in the idea of giving this power to administrative agencies. It's one thing if agencies are providing advice and helping Congress and the president exercise their powers, but instead they've assumed the power directly. So that today Congress really isn't that big of a player in writing the rules that control us. If you stack up all the laws Congress has enacted over the last 20 years against all the regulations agencies have enacted, you wouldn't even notice the laws Congress wrote. There are so few of them. Most of the lawmaking today happens by bureaucrats that no one elected and that no one can hold accountable.
So essentially what you're saying to me is you have law, and then as an addendum to the law, you have new law because regulations start, being born, and then they become law too. So we have law that is kind of branching off into other law. Is that right?
No, that's exactly right. The vast majority of lawmaking today happens in administrative agencies, and they cover the full gamut of things that human beings do. One of the best examples of this I can think of is that back in the 80s, the U.S. Department of Justice, which is federal prosecutors, tried to figure out just how many criminal laws and criminal regulations they were charged with enforcing. After trying to do that for a while, they ultimately threw up their hands because they decided it was too difficult to figure out what all the regulations were and which one had criminal penalties. So that even our own federal government can't tell you how many federal crimes have been created by the administrative state.
What? What? So if they don't know, there's really no recourse, as you said. I mean, so we have this thing called the Congressional Review Act, correct?
That's right. So I think it's important to remember, as I said earlier, the tide has been turning against the administrative state, so there is a recourse. We have the Constitution, and we have other laws we can use to hold agencies accountable and to begin pushing power back to where it belongs. And the Congressional Review Act is one of the earliest laws that attempted to do that. It was enacted in 1996 by a bipartisan Congress. It was actually signed by President Clinton, and it was enacted in recognition that agencies have too much power and they can regulate us too much without anyone we elect having any responsibility or say. What the law requires is that any time an agency wants to enact and impose a rule, it first has to submit the rule to Congress, which has an opportunity to review and disapprove the rule. And that is a critical check on agency abuses and agency power. And yet we found that over the last 20 years, agencies have routinely ignored that requirement and have just not sent rules up, assuming that absolutely nothing would happen. And that's why it's absolutely critical that we enforce that law. And PLF has filed several lawsuits, and the Office of Management and Budget in the White House has recently issued a guidance reminding agencies that this is not optional. When Congress says you have to do something, you have to do it, and the agencies have to get their act together.
Well, what's the consequence, though, Jonathan?
Well, under the law, if a rule has not been submitted to Congress, it cannot go into effect. Thus, every single person who is having one of these unsubmitted rules enforced against them has the right to go to court and say, nope, you can't enforce that because you've never submitted to Congress, it doesn't have that democratic approval, and it cannot be relied on.
So Pacific Legal Foundation, I think, needs a bigger law firm because you can make a full-time career out of just reviewing regulations or regulations that don't get submitted for scrutiny, and then start going down the judicial path, right?
Well, there certainly could be a cottage industry for that kind of litigation. We have a couple of test cases we filed. We got an important victory in Idaho, I think about 2 months ago. And the reality is you don't have to challenge every single one of these unsubmitted rules. Once courts hold agencies accountable a couple of times, they'll start submitting the rules voluntarily because they want to be able to enforce their rules. And we found that out directly in the Idaho case I mentioned. The court held that it would review agency violations, and if the rule hadn't been submitted, it was going to declare it void. And within a matter of weeks, the agency submitted it to Congress. This isn't something it's hard for agencies to do. They just need an incentive to do it.
Jonathan, for context, let's take the Department of Interior. Is there a guess on how many rules there are that were never submitted to Congress for scrutiny? I mean, are we talking 1,000 or are we talking 100,000? You have a sense of that?
It is hard to say, and it depends on the type of rule you're looking at. The Brookings Institute, which is a center-left think tank in D.C., did a study and found that there were hundreds of economically significant rules which had not been submitted. Now, that wasn't just the Department of Interior. That was across all agencies. But to be economically significant, a rule has to have $100 million in cost every year. So the fact that there are hundreds of those types of rules that haven't been submitted should be
$100 million?
troubling. Yes.
Why not 10 million?
I suspect that the concern would be that would draw in far too many rules. That's a standard that applies under the White House adopted that standard a while ago. That's the trigger for extra scrutiny by the White House whenever a rule is issued.
So $100 million just became the equivalent of $1,000 in government spending if they go all the way up to $100 million. But all right, so last year, I guess it was, Jonathan, President Trump signed an executive order. For every one regulation you want to put in, you have to remove 2 or 3. I think it was 3. Is that right?
It was 2.
2. Mm-hmm. And that really rang a bell. That resonated, but it only seemed like it resonated for a handful of months, and then it just kind of faded away into the sunset. Do we have to revisit that or re-ring that bell?
Well, as with anything, unless agencies and bureaucrats have an incentive to comply, they're not going to do so. The evidence so far has been that the Trump administration really has pared back the amount of regulation being imposed by administrative agencies. Estimates are that overall more costs of regulations have been cut than new costs imposed. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of regulation being imposed on us by bureaucrats.
Does the burden fall for oversight on this to the Office of Management and Budget, or does it, is there more than one subdivision of government that can check out, like the House Oversight Government Reform Committee?
Oh, absolutely. They all have a role. You're right that the Office of Management and Budget, which is a White House department, issued this guidance telling agencies they have to comply with the Congressional Review Act. But ultimately, the growth of the modern regulatory state is the fault of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
If Congress got back into the business of legislating rather than trying to kick the can over to agencies, this problem could be resolved immediately. It was Congress's efforts to avoid democratic accountability that led to this problem, and Congress is in the best position to solve it. But until we hold our elected representatives accountable for it, they too have no incentive to take it on.
So, Jonathan, we're going to have a hearing at the House Oversight Government Reform Committee, and you are one of the witnesses on the panel, and you get to make an opening statement on this very topic. What would your opening statement be?
Oh, can it be as short as do your job?
We hear that one all the time.
Yeah, I mean, too often when we have these conversations, it's, oh, bureaucrats are bad, bureaucrats blame bureaucrats. And Congress has been part of the reason why there's that focus. That if I'm a member of Congress, my ideal law is something, and this is an example my friend Tim Sanderson from the Goldwater Institute came up with. My ideal law is a law, I'll call it the no bad things law. The shortest law you've ever heard of. It's nothing like Obamacare. It has two provisions. The first one says there shall be no bad things. The second says there should be a no bad things agency which has to figure out what bad things are and how to stop them. Now, if I pass a law like that, I'm going to go back to my constituents and say, look, I did my job. I prevented all bad things. Re-elect me. And then things will start to come out from the agency, some of which I like and I'll praise, but some of which I won't like. And then I can win again by saying, well, look, that's obviously not what I meant, but what can I do? I'm just a member of Congress. The agencies are doing all this nonsense. And too often that's exactly what we see. Congress acts like it's powerless to deal with administrative agencies when Congress created them and controls them and can do whatever it wants to limit agency power.
An agency called No Bad Things. I kind of like that.
Well, you like it in theory. You would not like it once an agency got that kind of power, because you know how it would be.
Okay, so we have determined then that these unelected second, third tier bureaucrats that are sitting in the middle of, some kind of bullpen thing has come up with these regulations. These regulations have become law. And then Pacific Legal, when they get a case, they all of a sudden find out that there's regulations because of the case. And then you have to go challenge the regulations. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Any of the courts, leading up to the Supreme Court, when they make decisions, is it often that those decisions then become kind of a decision that, or an annex to a law? In other words, judicial decisions can almost become law themselves?
Well, to some extent, the role of the courts is to interpret the law. So when they say the law means this, that's what the law means. The courts don't have any authority to legislate.
Right.
They can't say, I wish they were all like this, so I'm just going to declare it so. And that's one of the reasons why our founders were least concerned about the judicial branch. It's the least dangerous branch. It can't declare war. It can't lock you up. It can't write a law. It can just say what the law means and resolve disputes.
And so when each of these branches of government are supposed to be the checks and balances on their flanked other branches, I think there's almost selective checks and balances or oversight. Did I get that right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by selective. What I think we can say is that we're starting to see interest from all three branches in taking on the problem, but it's very incremental. I said earlier it took almost 150 years for us to get from the point of creating the first administrative agency to the modern regulatory state. It's going to take some time to go back the other way, but there are reasons for hope. Courts have become increasingly skeptical whenever agencies claim broad powers under vague statutes. They no longer apply what's known as Chevron deference in cases like that. Chevron deference for decades was one of the most dangerous doctrines in our court system. It said that whenever a court is confronted by a party going up against the government, it has to accept whatever the government says the law means. And having a court put a heavy thumb on the scale in favor of one of the litigants in front of it is a very bad idea. And fortunately, we're seeing that change.
Jonathan, so when you take a case like the Idaho case or, an EPA case or whatever it may be, and you find one regulation that is hurting your client and has caused damage in whatever condition to your client because of a regulation, how often do you find that it's actually more than one regulation? In other words, this regulation led to another regulation, so it was really a half a dozen regulations that are affecting your client. I mean, it's like 1 for 6, or is it 1 for 1, or what?
Well, it's always a regulatory thicket. Generally, there's nothing you can do that's subject to only one regulation or even only one regulating agency. Almost everything is pervasively regulated by everyone. Famous civil rights lawyer Harvey Silverglate once predicted that no one can wake up in the morning and go to bed again that night without having committed at least 3 federal crimes, because everything is regulated to such an extent, almost anything you do is going to trigger some sort of regulatory issue.
I would imagine if you were a member of Congress, a congressperson, or even a senator, and said that you wanted to challenge a particular regulation here or challenge what I would call the Congressional Review Act, you become, in some cases, very unpopular with your fellow members of Congress. Is that overstating it?
I think it depends. As I said, there has been interest in Congress to deal with this issue, but only in a piecemeal fashion. Unless congressmen have an incentive to take this on seriously, they're not going to. So it has to affect individual votes. If I know I'm going to get reelected, and if I don't take on the problem, I'm not going to take on the problem. But there are suggestions at the Hill. There have been laws enacted by the Hill to address some of these problems, and the Congressional Review Act is a perfect example of that. Because voters cared about overregulation back in 1996, congressmen from both political parties got together and passed a law to take on the problem. Now, that's what it takes. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot to build that kind of political momentum, but it's absolutely possible, and Congress is in the best position to do something about this.
So you mentioned Office of Management and Budget earlier. That was kind of the police on this. Are they just looking at particular regulations that are $100 million, the cost or the value is $100 million or over, and they are taking this piece of paper and they're trotting on down to somebody's office and knocking on the door with that piece of paper? Or do they just have this list and it's sitting there until somebody calls on it? How does that work?
So the Office of Management and Budget is responsible for reviewing agency rules and determining which are major rules, which have the $100 million a year impact. So its role in the Congressional Review Act is to act as a clearinghouse. It takes in regulations, says which ones are major rules, and provides additional information to Congress about those. But the Congressional Review Act isn't limited to those rules. Every single rule an agency enacts has to go to Congress, whether it's a huge regulation touching air pollution throughout the country, or a small guidance document having to do with some small areas or small issue. No matter what the rule is, the people we elect in Congress have to be accountable for it, and the Congressional Review Act is the key means of ensuring that line of accountability.
I think Mick Mulvaney is still in charge of management and budget. Did I get that right?
I believe he's currently busy as the acting chief of staff for the White House.
Yeah, so, I don't think they necessarily took him away from OMB, but maybe they did. In your experience at Pacific Legal Foundation, have you found that one agency is particularly more abusive than another agency, that you would first target their bureaucratic regulations? I mean, is that EPA or is that Department of Energy, or is there one worse than the other?
It depends on what you mean by worse. The agency that has the greatest cost is by far the Environmental Protection Agency. Air pollution regulations generally cost 100 times what any other regulation would cost. But I think the greatest opportunities are to take on regulations that are imposing real harms on real people. So if an ordinary person can go to jail for something that no one would think should be illegal, that's the perfect case. In fact, there's a case before the Supreme Court right now dealing with how much power can Congress delegate to administrative agencies. It's the first time the court has taken up the question since 1935. And the reason why that issue is taken up is because it's a criminal case. Someone will go to jail based on the outcome of that question. And so that's the most sympathetic situation. That's the key for teeing up these questions and making sure that courts take them more seriously, because ultimately the judge who bangs the gavel is the person who sends them to jail, and they want to make sure that they're complying with the law when they do that.
Wow. So this can get very, very nasty. I
recommend to you and to your listeners, there's a Twitter account called A Crime a Day, which every single day posts a new crime you've never heard of that's been enacted by administrative agencies. And you wouldn't believe some of the things that are crimes. I mean, I think I saw yesterday there's a federal crime about how many cherries have to be in frozen cherry pies. So apparently if you were to produce the wrong kind of cherry pie, you could conceivably go to jail for having committed a federal crime. And there are a legion of examples like that.
Stop it. That had to come from a lobbyist.
I think it also has to come from the nature of administrative agencies. If I'm running an agency and my job is food or cherry pie, my incentive is to expand my power as much as I can. So I'm going to regulate as much as I can over whatever area I can.
Jonathan Wood, Pacific Legal Foundation. I so love these conversations because, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we little people out here outside the Beltway, we need Pacific Legal to kind of set us straight because we don't have a concept of this machinery here. Thank you, Jonathan Wood, for this presentation. Excellent job. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us because there's more coming your way.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic Radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.
Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget millennial entitlement and many others.
Right On, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to rightongame.com.
That's rightongame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
Rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. Rightongame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 435 921. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 47 9er, 89er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGPT. Gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us on the Denise Simon Experience. You know, Chick-fil-A was in the news maybe 90 seconds, and then it just sort of went away. But it needs to stay in the news because it's just constant attacks on the First Amendment, not only by people, but by universities, and now we have government. So Daniel Ortner, you know, Pacific Legal Foundation, is kind enough to join us to talk about this, the violation of the First Amendment. And it is. So Daniel, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks for having me.
Look, the protection of the First Amendment is not exclusive to the federal government now. Is that right? Did I say that right? Because now we have a city government that's doing it?
Right. Well, yeah, the First Amendment applies to governments of any level, be it the federal government, the state, the city, the local level, any form of government, because of the First Amendment as applied to the states via the 14th Amendment.
Okay, good. All right. I just want to make sure that there wasn't any kind of exclusivity that somebody snuck in there someplace.
No, it applies to all government entities. It wouldn't apply to private entities. So,
right.
If there's an airport that's completely privately held, for instance, they could choose whatever restaurant they want, assuming that they really are private and not being controlled by a government entity.
Okay, so we have Chick-fil-A, and there's been an attack on Chick-fil-A for quite some time just because of who Chick-fil-A is and who they donate to, and that they're a Christian organization, so forth and so on. I happen to be from Atlanta, and so Chick-fil-A is kind of near and dear to my heart. But anyway, so Chick-fil-A apparently applied to have some space at the San Antonio airport, but the San Antonio City Council, I guess, went no.
Right.
And
so they've been in negotiations, and I think pretty advanced negotiations in San Antonio to open up Chick-fil-A at the airport, and the council. So what happened? So Chick-fil-A a couple of years ago, back in 2012, was in the news because the owner spoke out critically of gay marriage. Then the owner kind of backed down and said, we're not going to speak publicly about these issues. And now for 7 years, they haven't really been in the spotlight and spoken out on matters of politics or morality. And just last month, Think Progress, which is a liberal hit site that goes out and digs up negative information about conservatives, they looked at Chick-fil-A's donations. And they found that Chick-fil-A had given money to such causes as the Salvation Army or the Intercollegiate Christian Athletics Association. And they said, well, these organizations are Christian, and they believe in traditional views of Christianity on marriage, and therefore, since Chick-fil-A gives donations to them, never mind that they run soup kitchens and help children, they don't have money for Christmas presents and all kinds of other good causes. Because they are Christian organizations, Chick-fil-A is bigoted and associating with bigots and giving its money to bigoted causes, and now we've got to go after them. And so right after that, that's when the San Antonio City Council, headed by the current mayor, the current head of the council, pushed to exclude Chick-fil-A.
Is Think Progress, it almost sounds like it's a sister to the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Well, they're not related, but Think Progress...
They're not related.
Well, yeah, no, Think Progress, it's a news website. It's part of the Center for American Progress. They're very heavily, very liberal and kind of going after conservatives. It's kind of part of what they do. They're, I'd say, in line with Media Matters and some other sites that target conservative causes and conservative groups. And really, what's going on here is, Chick-fil-A is an exemplar of what we liberals say they want corporations to be doing. It's socially conscious. It gives donations to charitable causes. It treats its employees well. It pays them well above the minimum wage. It gives them lots of benefits. It treats its customers well with compassion. There's not a single piece of evidence that it has ever discriminated against a gay customer, against a gay employee. There's no evidence of any actual acts of discrimination. But because the viewpoints of the owners happen to be Christian and the donations they're giving happen to be to conservative, traditional Christian groups, they are now persona non grata in the public square, and they're being excluded. And that's just what the First Amendment clearly prohibits.
This is beginning to take on the same kind of look that what happened to Hobby Lobby, isn't it?
Right. Well, that's right. Hobby Lobby obviously famously fought to the Supreme Court challenging the contraceptive mandate, and they kind of became the public face of that and got a lot of the negative attention for their actions. When all they wanted was an exemption to the contraceptive mandate. I think Chick-fil-A has kind of become the poster child of this kind of arch villain conservative religious organization, when really what they're doing is selling a high quality chicken product, like selling really good chicken sandwiches, and doing it in a way that people really like. And they're the number 3 fast food chain in the country now. Just recently they passed Subway for the number 3 spot after McDonald's and Starbucks. So they're doing something right. People really like their product. They like what the company's doing, and people talk with their dollars and choose to patronize Chick-fil-A because of the quality they offer.
So we have the San Antonio City Council that eventually came out and said no to the application of Chick-fil-A going into the airport. And then with a lot of, pushback, the City Council had an opportunity to rethink it.
That's right. Yep.
And, possibly backtrack on their negative response. And they chose not to, correct?
That's right. It was a very close vote. There was a Chick-fil-A day at the city in the city council where people came out and supported Chick-fil-A, and there was a reconsideration vote, and that failed pretty narrowly. I think it was 6-5. Very, very narrow margin that the reconsideration failed, and so they've kind of doubled down. This is the midst of a mayoral election in San Antonio. So there's a lot of politics around this where some feel like opposing Chick-fil-A is going to be good for their electoral chances, and so we'll see what happens. I frankly think people are just sick of this, sick of everything becoming politicized, of every donation the company makes, even to the Salvation Army. A donation that you made to make the Salvation Army becoming weaponized against you. I think people are tired of it, and so I think that this is going to backfire ultimately.
And so right on the heels of that, there's something that tells me almost the same thing happened to Chick-fil-A, I want to say, in Philadelphia.
Recently, there's Buffalo, New York, and San Jose talked about trying to do the same thing, but then they just realized, well, no, our contract is too far advanced already, so now they're going to put pride flags near the Chick-fil-A as kind of a...
Oh, yeah, okay.
We're going to show off that we disagree with your message. Buffalo, it seems like it's a little more complicated because there's a private contracting organization involved, and there's a question of did the government have any say in the matter. The timing there was suspicious because the head of the transportation authority said we don't want Chick-fil-A, and then immediately afterwards that same day the contractor said we are no longer working with Chick-fil-A. So the timing there is pretty suspicious, but there's a bit of question of was there actually a government organization that instigated that. Mm-hmm. But with San Antonio it's perfectly clear because this is a vote by the city council.
Okay, so what does Chick-fil-A do from here? Do they go sue the San Antonio City Council for a violation of the First Amendment? Or
I think they should. I mean,
I do too.
I don't know if they're going to do so. I mean, I think that their strategy, and understandably so, a couple of years ago was we don't want this fight. We're going to back away. We're going to build bridges. The owner, had a meeting with LGBT rights groups, and they reconciled, and things looked like they were working out. And now they're kind of being targeted, even though they didn't really do anything at this point. They haven't spoken out. Their donations are to groups like the Salvation Army. So I think that at this point, I mean, I don't have any inside knowledge on this, but it seems like they can't escape the fight. It's kind of coming to them whether they want it or not. And so I hope that they fight back. I think that San Antonio has given them plenty of reason to do so. It's pretty blatant, especially by the chief sponsors of this that they are targeting Chick-fil-A because of the organization's donations, because of the organization's religious views, not because of any policies that they have. There's nothing that they've said, well, you need to adopt this policy or drop this policy in your store that you're going to open to be here. It's all about the viewpoint, the donations of the owner and their religious values.
What's particularly interesting is in lawsuits, there is a procedure that includes discovery, right. and I think that is really where we need to be. We need to determine within a lawsuit if Chick-fil-A goes for this, what influence that Think Progress and or any other groups or monies were imparting some campaign contributions or some edicts to members of the San Antonio City Council. Therein lies where I think the important part is. It's kind of like these universities. When, conservative people or speakers come to give a talk, and they are accepted and they have to go through that whole bureaucracy, there's always a handful of students that show up and protest. I'm of the notion that they're like paid to do so. We'll give you a chicken sandwich in a box and a drink in order to go protest. There's something that tells me that we haven't gotten to the underlying mission here and how it's being pulled off.
I don't know if I think that a lot of it, there are probably some paid protesters, but I think a lot of it is organic. I think what's happening in college campuses, and I think the Chick-fil-A situation is another example of this, is that there's a group of individuals on the left that are so sure that they are right about their positions about everything, from sexual matters of sexuality and morality to any other topic you can imagine, that they think that hearing any views to the contrary is not only unhelpful or counterproductive, but actually harmful or inflicting of violence. And so that is a philosophical shift about the value of speech that's very dangerous. And that's, I think, what you're seeing with Chick-fil-A, where there's this idea that just seeing the sign of a Chick-fil-A restaurant, seeing their logo at the airport is going to cause violence or so deeply offend individuals that are gay that they just can't do that. And the better option is to exclude them altogether. And that's not what the First Amendment is ultimately about. I think we really need to get back to the principle that the marketplace of ideas is the idea that we need to allow room for people to speak, even when we disagree with them strongly. Even the ideas that we hate or find intolerant or find vile, we allow for room for their expression, and through that process of listening, we come to greater light and truth and knowledge. And so there's this understanding that, we are tough, we are resilient, we can handle hearing something we disagree with, seeing something that even offends us, and we can move on and we can be adults in a civil society, we can protest, we can counterspeak, we can disagree with each other, but we don't resort to violence and we don't resort to government force, which is a form of violence. And we allow for room for expression that we disagree with. And that is the foundation of the pillars of free speech that have existed in this country at least since the Second World War, and they're unfortunately really being undermined currently.
I don't think I could have said it any better. I mean, you just laid it out there perfectly. When the city council voted on this thing twice with Chick-fil-A, was there some kind of a public hearing where, people could get up to the microphone and they got their 2 minutes to speak pro or con? Or was this kind of all these votes done in outside of a public forum?
I don't know about the first time around when they first voted. I don't think there was a lot of public consideration then. The timing was such that this Think Progress article came out and I think it was the same day or the next day with the San Antonio vote. So I don't think there was a lot of time. I think that the second time around when they were moving to reconsider, there was this whole Chick-fil-A day at the Capitol there where people were voicing their support for Chick-fil-A, and I think that they got to speak to the city council.
Well, the reason I ask is it would be very interesting to see what happened if there was a public forum, where this vote occurred, where the pros and cons were that would necessarily influence the vote either way, and who those people may have been that spoke from either position. In other words, was a Think Progress person there? You know what I mean?
I don't know about that, but I think there is definitely a vocal minority group that is agitating for this. That says, well, Chick-fil-A is anti-gay and bigoted, and we need to exclude them. So there is a vocal minority, and I think they're very vocal. But I do think that in this case they're a minority. I think most people like Chick-fil-A because of the quality of the sandwiches. They value what Chick-fil-A offers, and they don't. I think they respect that the owner of Chick-fil-A is a devout believer, and the practices of the company. They're closed on Sundays in honor of their religious beliefs. They live. They walk the talk. They live what they believe and what they preach. And so I think people generally respect that. And I think overall people in this nation care about fairness ultimately for everyone. They really value it. They value both LGBT rights and religious freedom and the right of conscience. I think both of those things, the vast majority of people recognize as important rights that need to be protected and balanced. And they reject the all or nothing approach where it's, well, if we don't agree with every word you say, we're going to shut you up and we're going to kick you out of the public square. So that's my hope, at least, is that even though the minority is very vocal, critical of Chick-fil-A, that the most people recognize that this is an attack, that this is unnecessary, that this is not the value that we want to be putting forward, where we exclude people like that.
If Chick-fil-A actually did sue the San Antonio City Council, if for nothing else, it would almost be a public service here. You know what I mean? It would have a reach over into college campuses, into public school systems, into the city square, about this intolerance. We're reminded of the clerk, the marriage clerk, what was it, in Tennessee or Kentucky, that refused to sign a marriage certificate. Remember that one, Kim, whatever her name was?
Right.
Okay. So this is not a new phenomenon by a long stretch, but it's one that I think at some point needs to be resolved, sending messages across the whole chessboard here, right?
That's right. Yeah, I tell you, those cases like the bakers and the bakers and the photographers and such, those are more difficult cases because there's actually a case where someone is being turned away or denied a service. In this case, I think it's a really easy case for the First Amendment. I don't think they're really competing values here, because you have a company that all they've done is give private donations to organizations. They're not discriminating. They're not hiring or firing people on sexual orientation. They're not denying people the right to buy a chicken sandwich if they're gay. And so I think this is should be an easy case where the First Amendment clearly protects the right of the owner of Chick-fil-A and the foundation, their charitable foundation, to give donations to organizations that they support. And the city is not allowed to make a contract based on that. It's the clearest principle of the First Amendment. The guiding star is that the government is not allowed to establish orthodoxy in matters of politics, in matters of religion, or matters of opinion. That's the foundation stone of the First Amendment principles that we've all really, as a bipartisan consensus, has existed since the Second World War. And that's really what San Antonio is doing, is they're saying, if you don't agree with us, with our political positions, if you give your money and your speak out on things we don't agree with, we are going to censor you and we're going to exclude you from doing business in the public square. And that is deeply contrary to the First Amendment. And so I don't think this should be a difficult case. I think that there's a lot of evidence that San Antonio acted because they disagree with the view of Chick-fil-A. I hope the Chick-fil-A will either sue, or that I know that the Attorney General of Texas has launched an investigation, and they have a very good office.
Oh,
there.
good. Okay.
So I hope that they will do an investigation, and that they will also come to that conclusion, and maybe that's another way that this could resolve itself, rather than Chick-fil-A taking the lead in litigation.
Whether you're a federal politician on the federal payroll or a state payroll or city payroll, any politician really has a duty to help corporations, and if they have been deemed entities, if you will, by the Supreme Court, as well as individuals, people, help them protect their rights under the Bill of Rights, as enumerated in the Bill of Rights. And that's just clearly didn't happen here, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, every government official takes an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and also the Constitution of the state if they're state official, and so that there is an obligation there, and I think that's really, San Antonio has fallen short of that. I think fundamentally they and many others have lost sight of what the First Amendment really stands for. That it means you have to allow room for views you disagree with. You have to allow people, even people that strongly disagree with you, to have their say and to be treated equally by the government.
Daniel Ortner with Pacific Legal Foundation. I hope maybe you guys can send a letter over there to Atlanta and tell the Cathy family, if for nothing else, send a warning letter that we may go to court on this one, because I would sure like to see some discovery on this. But great presentation, and thank you for that. And thanks for all the great work that Pacific Legal Foundation does. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us because there's more coming your way.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We have a part of government, I think it's actually run out of Treasury. It's called the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States. And for the listeners out there, you may have heard just a little bit about it when it came to Uranium One and Hillary Clinton. But there's actually much more to it. Riley Walters, who's the policy analyst for the Davis Institute on National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, did something wonderful, and he wrote a summary on it. And so what do? I call on Riley to come help us learn some more about CFIUS. So thank you, Riley, for joining us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Sure, thanks for having me.
When it comes to foreign investment, and if we get a lot of it, that means that there are some very good opportunities here in the United States. I think that's the top level view of what CFIUS is for. Is that right?
You're correct. I mean, the more foreign direct investment, the more jobs, the more economic growth that's facilitated in the United States, which is good for everyone. What CFIUS does, CFIUS is sort of the intersection between facilitating good foreign direct investment, but also making sure that we are protecting our national security interests from potential bad actors looking to invest in the United States.
And so the committee, it's made up of quite a large handful of government agencies that are supposed to, I guess, review these applications. Is that right?
That's correct. So the committee is made up of 9 various agencies of the government, of the federal government. It is chaired by the Department of the Treasury. It includes, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Commerce, Energy, Trade, things like that. Basically, trying to get all the people who would know what to look for as a potential threat, and also within our interests of potential investments. And so, Treasury leads this, and what they will do is they will all work together. Treasury will sometimes actually hand this off to a specific agency to take the lead. For example, if this is more of a defense investment, then the Department of Defense will take this up, and they will review it and consider whether this investment should be allowed in the United States or not.
Is something in my belly tells me that in some cases, all foreign investment should go through this committee, but something tells me that's not always the case. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, sometimes, just first of all, they have certain restrictions. What CFIUS has traditionally focused on is the controlling aspect of investment. So, for example, if a Chinese company wants to buy an American company, first of all, are they actually buying it or are they just investing, right? Because there's a difference between buying 5% of their stock versus buying the entire company. And then second, what threat does that potential Chinese owner present versus what risk does selling of the U.S. company present to the United States? So there's a lot of measuring going on. For example, if it's just let's say a mom and pop Chinese company that's been very successful over the past few years, and they want to make inroads in the United States. I don't know. Let's say like the candy corn business, for example, in the United States, that would not go under review, I don't think, at all, because it represents zero to no threat, I think, to the U.S. national security interest.
Yet it once a mom and pop or once some company is inside and they've been approved and they've made whatever investment or partial purchase of stock and whatnot, is there continued oversight, Riley, such that it's kind of like once they're here, they can do some other things and no one's paying attention, or somebody is paying attention?
It all comes down to, I think, the transaction. It's very transactional. So, if, for example, something were to change in their corporate structure and the way that they're owned, for example, if they get bought out by, I don't know, let's say a Chinese state-owned enterprise, right? And then all of a sudden they want to move out of candy corns and into semiconductors, then there's a lot of red flags there, and CFIUS will pick this up and review it and potentially block it.
This could be quite a nerve-wracking piece of work here for these agencies in Treasury, correct?
Oh yeah, certainly. So one thing that we've seen over the past few years, I mean, Treasury it's not just Treasury, it's all the members of the committee. I mean, they are being overworked, not just because of the increase in foreign investment which we are seeing in the United States, which is a good thing, but they are also being overworked by the number of reviews they have to initiate, the intricacy of these reviews, right? So the difficulty in recognizing or analyzing the threat that potential investors are, and also just the time it takes to review these. So it's sort of a snowballing effect, right? So what we're seeing is more reviews, longer time in the review process, and this is having a negative impact on these foreign investments, which, I mean, if it's potential threats, right? If there are threatening investments, for example, from China, then I think there's a good argument to be made that shouldn't really matter. I mean, these need to be reviewed, but if it also includes potential good investment from, for example, Canada or Japan or UK, then that's a negative effect.
How long does the process normally take, Riley? Is this a year's process, or is this 2 years, or is there some kind of a template on a timeline?
They have guidance on how long it should take, but again, this has become flexible for several years, right? So there's actually different steps. There's a initial filing. Sort of, this could take anywhere. Well, there's an unofficial filing, and this has actually been expanding.
Oy vey.
Up to a month long. Subsequent reviews and investigations can take anywhere from 30 to 45 days, and then if it does ever get to the point where CFIUS can't actually make a decision, because there are occasions where CFIUS cannot make a decision on its own, it's actually sent up to the president, and the president has to decide on this. What we've also seen, though, is, for example, if they get through steps 1 and 2, the companies sometimes will withdraw their review and resubmit just to give themselves more time. And there are a couple instances where some reviews have gone on for a couple of years. So there's no real set timeline. I think most reviews are cleared pretty quickly, because most investments don't really present a threat. So these are cleared quickly, but there are some that are definitely more questionable, and so these ones take a lot longer.
In the travels, Qatar is kind of a questionable, shady kind of country that doesn't always work in the best interest of the United States or some of our partners. We've certainly seen that when it comes to Russia, because Russia has an investment fund. Saudi Arabia has an investment fund. Clearly, China does. So by virtue of the country, does it have some warning bells already when these applications are made?
Certainly. So they're just kind of looking over like the numbers of CFIUS. There are 4 major countries from which we have the most reviews or most investigations from. It goes China, Canada, Japan, and the UK. Now, you might wonder why is China looped in with Canada, Japan, and the UK? It's because Canada, Japan, and UK are our 3 largest foreign investors by a good number, right? So for sheer statistics, the more investment that they have, the more it's potentially reviewed. So really, most of that's benign. What it is China is up there as well, though, because Chinese investment certainly is a concern for the U.S. And that's even more so, I think, in recent days. I mean, we've seen a half dozen recent news coming from the committee, coming from private companies regarding Chinese investment. For example, Grindr, the dating app, they want CFIUS wants its Chinese owner to basically sell its share. There was a recent startup healthcare service called Patients Like Me, which they want their Chinese owner to divest out of. Toshiba has an LNG business in the United States. CFIUS wanted, or a Chinese company failed to clear the CFIUS process of investing in that company, and just a number of other things. So certainly China is a red flag. Russia is also a big flag, but we don't get a lot. I don't think we get as much investment from Russia as we do China, and of course countries like Qatar. I think Saudi Arabia. I don't really know where they fall on this, but I do know that CFIUS has an automatic review for any state-owned enterprises that invest in the United States, and any countries that boycott Israel are automatically reviewed.
And if it goes necessarily through committee and it's approved, or there's still some questions, the president still has veto power, correct?
The president can step in every now and then and say, I don't really like this, especially, again, if CFIUS is unsure what decision to make, whether they're unclear of whether this actually presents a national security threat or not. Once it clears committee, I mean, there are some things that actually, sometimes these investments, they clear committee with little to no hurdle. Again, just they're benign, they're not a threatening investment. Other times, though, the committee will work with either the investor or the company that's being bought, for example, an American company, and set up what's called mitigating rules, or mitigating agreements, saying we are okay with your investment, but there are a couple of concerns that we have, and we would like you to address those concerns before we allow you to invest. So what CFIUS will do is they'll occasionally follow up on these mitigating rules. In fact, what we just recently saw, though, is a fine. CFIUS has just recently allowed for to be able to fine companies for not agreeing to mitigating agreements. So what they did recently was fine a unspecified company, because most of this information is classified or just not publicly available to protect investors' personal information. But this one unspecified company was actually fined up to $1 million for not agreeing or not abiding by the mitigating agreements that CFIUS has agreed with them since 2016.
Riley, has there been a time where a application investment was approved and we later found out that things went sideways and We withdrew it. We threw them out, and things got real ugly after that.
I don't know if anything's really snowballed to the extremes like that. I mean, there are definitely, again, I mean, for example, this one, what I just mentioned, this fine, for this specific company, obviously they wouldn't agree to the mitigating agreement, and so they were fined, and I think that was pretty much it. But there are instances, of course, where so traditionally CFIUS has been voluntary, which means companies are the ones who are supposed to be filing these themselves, right? So,
right.
For the recent Grinder example is a perfect example of one of these after the fact curmudgeons, right? So this company, Beijing Kunlun Tech, right? It bought Grinder several years ago, and this was actually around the same time that CFIUS was going through these significant reforms legislatively here in Washington. And anyways, so the company, it bought Grinder. It did not go through the CFIUS process. And so now CFIUS has come back and said, you didn't go through the process. We're looking at it now. We don't like it. We don't like you owning it. And we want you to sell your shares in it, which is a huge cost to companies. I mean, we say CFIUS is voluntary, but given the cost that the cost for companies who don't file and end up in this situation, I mean, it's much more costly if they don't and end up failing, and CFIUS comes back and says, you got to go.
So Riley, does this also include real estate purchases, just outright real estate purchases, and or construction where, some country in their investment fund wants to come in and buy a large piece of property and develop multi-use buildings? Or is that outside of that scope of CFIUS?
It does. So one of the factors sort of for consideration for CFIUS is there's a couple things. One are greenfield investments, so just investments from the ground up, really. So that includes real estate. And the other one is proximity to military bases. So, if, for example, an investor wants to build a really large building right next to an air base, this is problematic, potentially.
Yeah. I think I saw where during the Obama regime that he had actually vetoed one or two Chinese companies that were made application on some real estate in Washington State, and that one was denied, or eventually denied. What is the oversight of Congress? Is there do they get some kind of report on these type of applications?
Well, they can get, they can talk with the committee, I think, on a more private level, but generally speaking, Congress and the U.S., the public are limited to public reports that used to come out every year, and even then, it's really focused on the year before that. So the thing about the committee is it is very secretive. It's hard to know exactly, what are the trends in investment, how the committee's resources are appropriately being applied. But there's good reason for that, obviously, to maintain a level of national secrecy, level of national security, and also to protect certain investors' proprietary information, because, well, it's not just the investors, of course, but the Americans or companies in the United States being purchased, protecting their information. Congress, of course, does have legislative ability to reform CFIUS whenever it liked, and so we saw that recently a couple years ago. It gave CFIUS a little bit more authority to review things that might be a threat to Americans' personal information, and investments that might be a threat to cybersecurity. And so this is, Congress definitely has an interest in this, and it is actually one of the few things where there's actually agreement on this, a bipartisan agreement on CFIUS reform. So it's definitely in their interest, and I think they do maintain a good level of oversight. But there's always the appropriations, right? It always can come back to money and how much money members are getting, right? And so what you referenced earlier, what I wrote was essentially, our agencies, are the members of CFIUS adequately being funded, right? Because again, it comes back to resources. If the Treasury doesn't have enough people to review the number of cases, which are becoming more complicated, this has a snowball effect. And so the recent legislation that was passed to reform CFIUS, I essentially said it's a $40 million reform, right? Because of the top line request from the members of CFIUS, they're requesting almost $40 million to become compliant to this new legislation. Whether that will be enough, I don't think we'll really know until next year. Certainly with the next year's appropriations request, but it's certainly a good number to be cognizant.
Typically, Riley, how many foreign investors make an application a year? Are we looking at tens of thousands, or are we looking in the realm of hundreds?
So there's a difference between the applications and reviews, right? So if there's an application and they just say, okay, that's fine, go ahead, then that's not really recorded in sort of the investigation review category. And so in that realm, I mean, there could be tens of thousands, right? We don't really know because it's not really public.
Right.
It's not necessary. But in the review and investigation side, we are seeing a significant increase, and the committee is expecting a four-time increase almost. So over the past few years, just sort of looking at the trends of CFIUS, so from, I think it was 2008 to 2015, we saw an increase of fourfold, something from 70 investigations a year up to 250. This year, they're expecting over 1,000 investigations easily, right? So you're going from 200, 230, 250, something in the low 200s to over 1,000, which is significant by, I think, anyone's measure.
Goodness. This is quite the task. Do other countries do somewhat the same thing? If the United States wants to go into Niger, or are we just the ones that are kind of protecting ourselves?
We do have allies in this regard, and a lot of our friends and allies have similar committees or mechanisms to review foreign investment for national security. I don't know if Niger has one.
I just threw that country out.
But Germany, UK, France, Japan, each of these countries has specific and a little bit different but very similar structures that allow them to review foreign investments, decide whether it's a benefit for their national interests, and essentially the same thing, just at the top line. I mean, going into the weeds of it, they're a little bit different just based on their structure, based off of their governments and how they work, and also a little bit based on their interests. I think France might consider some agricultural investments a threat to their national interest.
So I would imagine that our U.S. trade representative is very involved. I mean, he necessarily has his fingerprints on this process too. Would that be right?
He is a member of CFIUS, yes.
Okay. Well, it's really quite the fascinating part of government that we certainly don't hear about in any real measure. And I would argue, you had mentioned that there's parts of it that are very secretive because of who these companies are or who these investors are. Some of them want to maintain, their anonymity, correct?
Yes.
Well, given what you have illustrated, I mean, it shows that the economic landscape of the United States is still good if we have these activities going on to the point where the growth is there and we're having more investors, but the process has gotten very slow because of that volume. So some of the growth could be delayed because of the CFIUS committee, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's a potential risk. Again, of the four main countries where we see the most investigations targeted, we have Canada, Japan, and UK. These are our largest investors in the U.S. And so if their investments are being delayed, that's a negative negative on potential U.S. growth, U.S. jobs, and of course the future of our growth. Yeah.
And when these applications are made, CFIUS can kind of change up this thing and say, well, we don't want you to go do this in Wisconsin. We'd rather you go do this in Iowa. I mean, we can kind of put some stipulations and conditions to the investment, correct?
I think the stipulations would come more down to any threats they have, so they're not going to direct the investment, right?
Okay.
If Japan's buying a company that's only in California, if a Japanese company is only buying a company that's located in California, the committee is not going to come in and say, well, you know what, I've got a better deal for you over here, right?
Interesting.
They're mostly focused just on sort of the national security threats that could be presented by the investment.
Well, we certainly do face a whole pile of national security threats and policy issues. Riley Walters, thanks so much for joining us and explaining all this to us because, I'm kind of with you. I'm in the whole national security realm, and there's a lot of nefarious things are going on, and CFIUS, I think, is kind of one of the oversights, if you will, that can mitigate some of those risks. So thank you for your explanation and the summary on this, and we appreciate your time. And ladies and gentlemen, we're very happy that you could be with us, and we'll see you again very soon.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic Radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.